The old rotary phone in my hallway rang at exactly 11:47 on a Thursday night, the sound cutting through 20 years of silence like a knife through still water. I was in my armchair by the window, the same chair where I'd sat countless nights watching the street for headlights that never came, and the ringing seemed impossibly loud in a house that had forgotten what sound felt like. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver, and in that moment between silence and speaking, I knew with absolute certainty that my life was about to crack open in ways I'd stopped allowing myself to imagine. Before we start, comment your name and where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far my story is traveling. My name is Margaret Louise Chambers, and I'm 62 years old. I've lived in the same house for 38 years, a modest 2-story colonial on Maple Street with blue shutters and a porch I repaint every 3 years, whether it needs it or not. The house is too big for one person, always has been really, but I've never been able to leave. This is where my daughter Emily grew up, where she learned to ride her bike on the driveway, where she had her first kiss on the front porch steps when she thought I wasn't watching from the kitchen window. This house holds every memory I have of her, and leaving would feel like abandoning her all over again. Emily disappeared on October 15th, 2003. She was 17 years old, a senior in high school with college applications scattered across the dining room table, and plans to study marine biology because she'd always loved the ocean, even though we lived 3 hours inland. She was beautiful in that unconscious way teenagers are. With long brown hair, she was always tucking behind her ears, and her father's green eyes that could shift from serious to laughing in a heartbeat. She was smart, cautious, not the kind of girl who took risks or trusted strangers. That's what made her disappearance so impossible to understand. It was a Friday night. Emily had gone to a football game with her friends. Nothing unusual, something she'd done dozens of times before. She'd borrowed my car, a reliable Honda sedan I'd bought specifically because it was safe and dependable. She'd kissed my cheek on her way out the door and said she'd be home by 11. I remember she was wearing her favorite jeans and a sweater I'd given her for her birthday. Pale blue like the sky just before sunset. 11 came and went. Midnight. I called her friends and they said she'd left the game around 10:30, said she was tired and wanted to come home. They'd walked her to the parking lot, watched her get in the car, waved as she drove away, but she never made it home. Somewhere in the 20-minute drive between the high school and our house, Emily vanished. By 2 a.m, I'd called the police. By dawn, there was a search party. By noon the next day, they found my car on the shoulder of Highway 47, the old route that ran parallel to the newer interstate, a stretch of road that was mostly empty after dark. The car was locked, keys in the ignition, Emily's purse on the passenger seat with her wallet and phone inside. Nothing was missing. Nothing was damaged. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of what had happened. She'd simply stopped the car and disappeared. The investigation consumed everything. Police interviewed everyone Emily knew, searched the woods along the highway, dragged the creek that ran under the old bridge near where the car was found. They looked for runaways, checked hospitals, followed leads that went nowhere. Tips came in from people who thought they'd seen her, sightings that scattered across 3 states, but none of them were real. Emily had become a ghost, present in everyone's mind but absent from the physical world. My husband David couldn't handle it. We'd been married for 19 years, built what I thought was a solid life together, but grief broke us in ways we couldn't repair. 6 months after Emily disappeared, David moved out. He said he couldn't live in the house anymore, couldn't sleep in Emily's room across the hall, couldn't eat at the table where her place setting still waited. He said he needed to move forward, to accept that Emily was gone and build a new life. I couldn't do that. I couldn't give up. So David left, and we divorced quietly a year later. 2 people who'd loved each other but couldn't survive the loss of what we'd loved more. I kept working my job as a librarian at the county library, kept living in our house, kept Emily's room exactly as she'd left it. Her bed was still unmade from the morning she disappeared. Her backpack still hung on the chair. Her books still stacked on her nightstand. People thought I was holding on too tightly, refusing to accept reality, but I wasn't holding on to the past. I was keeping space for her return. Because Emily wasn't dead. I knew it with a certainty that lived in my bones. She was out there somewhere, and she needed to know how to get home. I kept the same phone number, even though everyone else had switched to cell phones and the rotary phone in the hallway looked increasingly like an antique. I kept the porch light on every night, a beacon visible from the street, because I'd read that missing children look for lights when they're trying to find their way home. I kept her disappearance active in every database, refreshed the missing person posters every year with age progression photos that showed what Emily might look like as she grew from 17 to 25 to 30 to 37. The years accumulated like dust. I went to work, came home, sat by the window watching the street, went to bed, and woke up to do it again. People stopped asking how I was doing because the answer never changed. David remarried and moved to Arizona, sent me a Christmas card the first few years, but eventually stopped. Emily's. Friends graduated, went to college, built careers and families, moved away and moved on. The world kept turning while I stayed still, frozen in the moment before Emily disappeared, waiting for the moment after she came home. I knew people talked about me. The woman who wouldn't let go. The mother stuck in the past. The librarian who still set a place at the table for a daughter who'd been gone for 2 decades. I heard the whispers, saw the pitying looks, but I also saw something else sometimes, usually in other mothers' eyes, a recognition, a knowledge that they'd do the same thing, that love doesn't have an expiration date and hope doesn't consult a calendar. On the 20th anniversary of Emily's disappearance, October 15th, 2023, I did what I'd done every year. I posted new flyers around town, sent updated information to the national missing persons databases, and placed an advertisement in the local paper with Emily's photo and a message. Still waiting, still loving you. Come home. That night, I sat by the window as usual, watching the street, keeping vigil. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one that had belonged to my parents and measured time in steady, indifferent beats. 20 years, 7,300 days, 175,200 hours. I'd counted them all, each one a small eternity of not knowing, of existing in the terrible space between hope and grief, unable to fully inhabit either because both felt like betrayal. Hope felt like denying the possibility that something terrible had happened. Grief felt like giving up on the chance she might still come home. So I existed between them in a liminal space that had become my permanent residence. The woman in the house with the blue shutters where the light never went off and the phone number never changed, and time had stopped moving forward on a Friday night in October 2003. 3 weeks after the 20th anniversary, on a Thursday in early November, a storm rolled in around sunset. I watched it approach from my window, dark clouds gathering over the trees, the sky turning that particular shade of green that means serious weather. The wind picked up, bending the trees in the yard, pulling leaves from branches in violent swirls. Rain began gentle at first, then harder, drumming against the roof and windows with increasing urgency. I made tea and settled into my chair with a book I wasn't really reading, just holding the way I did most evenings. The storm intensified, thunder rolling across the sky, lightning illuminating the street in brief, stark flashes. The power flickered but held. The grandfather clock ticked on. Time continued its steady march through another evening in my unchanging life. Then, at 11:47, the hallway phone rang. I jumped, because that phone never rang. Everyone who might call me had my cell number. The only people who had that old landline were telemarketers and wrong numbers, and even those had become rare. but the ring was unmistakable. That harsh bell sound that old rotary phones make, cutting through the storm noise with startling clarity. I stood up slowly, my book falling to the floor unnoticed, and walked to the hallway. The phone sat on a small table beneath Emily's senior portrait, and in the dim light, I could see my hand reaching for the receiver, shaking slightly, suspended in a moment that felt stretched and strange. I picked up the phone and said, "Hello?" Static filled the line, the sound of distance and interference, and for a moment I thought it was just a bad connection or a telemarketer with a cheap overseas setup. I was about to hang up when I heard a voice, faint and broken, threaded through with static and something that sounded like wind. "Mom?" My heart stopped. Actually stopped for a beat, then restarted with a painful thud against my ribs. "Mom, it's me." The voice was young, feminine, scared. It was exactly the voice I heard in my dreams every night. The voice that lived in my memories, unchanged by time, because time had stopped for me on October 15th, 2003. "Emily?" I whispered, and the word came out broken, disbelieving. "I'm sorry, Mom." The voice was clearer now, and I could hear her crying, soft sobs underneath the words. "I'm so sorry I couldn't come home. I tried. I really tried, but I couldn't." The line crackled, breaking up. "I need you to know." More static. "I never stopped loving you." "Emily, where are you?" I was shouting now, pressing the phone so hard against my ear it hurt. "Tell me where you are. I'll come get you. Just tell me where." "The road," she said, and her voice sounded further away, fading. "I'm still on the road, Mom. I couldn't get past it. I'm still trying to get home." "What road? Emily, what happened? What?" "Thank you for waiting," she said, and now her voice was barely a whisper. "Thank you for the light. I could see it from so far away. I could always see it." "Emily, don't hang up. Please don't." The line went dead. Not a click of disconnection, but a sudden absolute silence, like a door slamming shut between worlds. I stood in the hallway gripping the phone, and I realized I was screaming, Emily's name echoing through the empty house, bouncing off walls that had held nothing but silence for 20 years. I tried to redial, but the old rotary phone didn't have caller ID, didn't have a callback function, was just a relic from another era that had somehow transmitted a voice from even further back. I called 911, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my cell phone. The operator answered, calm and professional, and I tried to explain what had happened, tried to make sense of the impossible. My daughter called. She's been missing for 20 years, and she just called me. "You need to trace the call. You need to find where she is." The operator, patient and kind, took down information, said she'd send an officer to take a report, but I could hear the skepticism in her voice. Missing for 20 years. A phone call in the middle of a thunderstorm. A mother who'd never accepted her daughter was gone, now hearing voices on the phone. I knew how it sounded. I didn't care. The police came. 2 officers who'd been children when Emily disappeared and knew my story only as a cautionary tale told to new recruits. They listened politely, took notes, examined the old phone. They called their dispatcher to request a trace on incoming calls to my landline. While we waited, one of them, a young woman with kind eyes, gently suggested that sometimes old phone lines pick up interference during storms, that crossed wires could create sounds that seem like voices, that our minds could interpret static into patterns that match what we're listening for. "It was her voice," I said firmly. "I know my daughter's voice. It was Emily." The other officer, older and more cautious, asked what Emily had said. I repeated it as exactly as I could remember. Every word burned into my memory in the 5 minutes since I'd heard them. When I finished, they exchanged a glance I couldn't quite read. The dispatcher called back. They'd traced the incoming call. It had come from a payphone. The location made both officers go still. Highway 47, Mile marker 23, the exact location where Emily's car had been found 20 years ago. The officers offered to drive me to the location, but I refused. This was something I needed to do alone. I grabbed my coat and car keys, barely hearing their warnings about driving in the storm, about not getting my hopes up, about staying safe. I was already out the door in my car, pulling out of the driveway I'd watched Emily pull out of for the last time 20 years before. Highway 47 was mostly abandoned now, had been for years. When they built the new interstate in 2005, traffic shifted away from the old two-lane highway that wound through farmland and forest. Most of the businesses along it had closed, gas stations and diners and motor lodges left to decay, reclaimed slowly by weeds and weather. I hadn't driven this road since the investigation, had actively avoided it, taking the longer route on the interstate to avoid the memories. Now I drove it in darkness and rain, my headlights cutting through the storm, illuminating road signs that leaned drunkenly in faded paint on pavement that buckled and cracked. Mile marker 20. Mile marker 21. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my fingertips on the steering wheel. Mile marker 22. Mile marker 23. I pulled over where they'd found Emily's car, a wide shoulder near a stand of oak trees. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, clouds breaking up overhead to reveal patches of stars. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, trying to prepare for whatever I was about to find. The payphone stood about 30 feet from the road, partially hidden behind overgrown bushes. I hadn't even known it was there, and I wondered how many times I'd driven past this spot during the investigation without noticing it. It was an old-style phone booth, the kind that was becoming obsolete even 20 years ago, standing alone like a forgotten monument to an earlier era of communication. I approached slowly, my footsteps crunching on gravel, my breath visible in the cold air. The booth was in remarkably poor condition, glass mostly gone from the sides, the phone itself covered in rust and ivy, hanging from a metal cord that should have been cut years ago. It looked like it hadn't worked in decades, like it shouldn't be capable of transmitting anything, much less a call across town. I reached out and touched the receiver, and it was cold, slick with rain and something else, something that felt organic, like the forest was trying to absorb it back into the earth. I lifted it to my ear, not expecting anything, but needing to try. Silence. No dial tone, no static, just the emptiness of a dead line. I stood there for a long time, holding that broken phone, staring at the spot where Emily's car had been found, trying to understand what had happened. The rational part of my brain said the officers were right, that it had been interference or crossed wires, or my desperate mind interpreting static into the words I needed to hear. But the part of me that had kept vigil for 20 years, the part that had never stopped believing Emily was out there, that part knew different. That part knew I'd heard my daughter's voice. When I finally drove home, it was past 2 a.m. The house felt different when I walked in, like something had shifted in its fundamental nature. The silence wasn't the same silence I'd been living in. It was fuller somehow, occupied by an absence that had finally been acknowledged. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Emily's room for the first time in years, really sat in it instead of just standing in the doorway looking in. I touched her books, her stuffed animals arranged on her bed, her clothes still hanging in her closet. I'd preserved everything so carefully, maintained this shrine to a moment in time, but sitting there in the pre-dawn darkness, I realized I'd been preserving my grief as much as her memory. The sun rose gray and cold, a November morning that promised rain and early winter. I called the library and took a personal day, the first unscheduled day off I'd taken in years. Then I did something I'd been avoiding for 2 decades. I went to the police station and asked to see the full case file on Emily's disappearance. Detective Sarah Morrison, who'd inherited the case after the original investigators retired, met me in a conference room with 3 boxes of files. She was in her 40s, had been a patrol officer when Emily disappeared, and she treated me with professional courtesy and genuine compassion. "Mrs. Chambers," she said, sitting across from me, "I heard about the phone call. I want you to know we take it seriously, even if you think I imagined it," I finished. She hesitated. "Even if there are rational explanations. But I also want to be honest with you. We've had the case reviewed multiple times over the years. Without new evidence, without witnesses, without remains, there's a limit to what we can investigate." "Then help me," I said. "Help me understand what happened 20 years ago. Let me see everything." Detective Morrison studied me for a moment, then nodded and pushed the boxes toward me. I spent the next 8 hours going through every document, every photograph, every statement and report. I read witness accounts from Emily's friends who'd seen her leave the football game. I studied crime scene photos of her car, every angle, every detail. I reviewed cell phone records and credit card statements and all the other digital traces that make up a life, traces that stopped abruptly on October 15th, 2003. The investigation had been thorough, too thorough to have missed anything obvious. Emily had simply vanished from a locked car on a relatively traveled road in the span of maybe 20 minutes. There were no signs of foul play, no evidence of abduction, no indication she'd left voluntarily. She'd just stopped existing in the physical world, as completely as if she'd never been there at all. But as I read through everything, I started noticing small details that hadn't connected before. Several other people had reported strange experiences on that stretch of Highway 47 over the years, mostly dismissed as coincidence or superstition. A trucker who said he'd seen a young woman hitchhiking at mile marker 23, but when he circled back, she'd vanished. A couple who'd broken down at the same spot and claimed they'd heard knocking on their car windows when no one was there. A state trooper who'd responded to a 911 call from the payphone only to find it disconnected and no sign of whoever had called. "Detective Morrison," I said, looking up from the files, "did anyone follow up on these other reports? The ones about strange things happening at that location?" She looked uncomfortable. "Those reports were deemed not credible. People see what they want to see. The mind fills in blanks." "What if it's not filling in blanks?" I asked. "What if something really happened there? Something that explains why Emily's car was found there and why no one ever saw what happened?" "Mrs. Chambers, I can't open an investigation based on ghost stories." "I'm not asking you to investigate ghosts," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "I'm asking you to investigate the location. Has anyone ever done a thorough search of the area? Ground-penetrating radar? Cadaver dogs?" "That's expensive," Detective Morrison said gently, "and without probable cause." "My daughter called me from that payphone last night," I said, and my voice was steady, certain. "You have the phone records. You know where the call came from. That's probable cause to look more carefully at that location. Please." Detective Morrison was quiet for a long time, studying my face. Then she sighed. "Let me make some calls. I'm not promising anything, but let me see what I can do." It took 3 weeks to arrange, but Detective Morrison managed to get approval for a search team to examine the area around mile marker 23 on Highway 47. They brought ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, metal detectors, the full array of search equipment. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I went anyway, stood at a distance, and watched as they methodically covered the area in a grid pattern. I expected them to find nothing. I expected this to be the final proof that Emily had somehow walked away from that spot and disappeared into a voluntary oblivion. I expected closure that wouldn't actually close anything, just seal it in a box labeled unsolved and move it to the back of the file room. Instead, on the second day of searching, one of the dogs alerted at a spot about 40 yards from the payphone in a dense section of woods that sloped down toward the creek. The ground-penetrating radar showed an anomaly. They brought in excavation equipment. What they found made Detective Morrison call me immediately. It wasn't Emily. That was the first thing she told me, and I felt relief and disappointment in equal measure. But it was a vehicle. Buried about 6 feet underground, covered by 20 years of accumulated soil and leaf matter and forest growth. A vehicle that had been there much longer than Emily's disappearance. It took 2 days to excavate. I stood watching the entire time, barely eating, barely sleeping, understanding that whatever they were uncovering was going to change something fundamental about the story I'd been living inside. The vehicle was a van, a 1970s model that had been green once but was now mostly rust and decay. When they finally opened it, they found remains inside. Not one person, 3. The forensic team worked carefully, documenting everything, and Detective Morrison came to stand beside me as they processed the scene. "Mrs. Chambers," she said quietly, "this is going to take time to sort out, but preliminary estimates suggest these remains have been here for approximately 50 years. This appears to be an old crime scene, probably from the early 1970s. "What does this have to do with Emily?" I asked, though I was starting to understand, starting to see the shape of something terrible and impossible. "Maybe nothing directly," Detective Morrison said, "but it explains some things. That stretch of road has been dangerous for a long time. We're going to need to search the entire area more thoroughly." They did. Over the next week, they expanded the search grid, and they found 2 more burial sites, another vehicle, single graves scattered through the woods, remains that dated from the 1970s through the 1990s, evidence of decades of disappearances that had never been connected, never been solved, all clustering around the same spot on an old highway that had seen too many people vanish without explanation. The media descended. "Highway of Lost Souls," one tabloid called it. "Cursed Road claims another victim," said another. The serious journalists dug into missing persons cases from 5 decades, finding patterns that had been missed because they'd been spread across different jurisdictions, different decades, different investigators who'd never had reason to compare notes. Emily's case was reopened with renewed urgency. Detective Morrison assembled a team to review everything with the new context. They interviewed everyone again, looked for connections to the other disappearances, searched for a common thread that might explain what had been happening on Highway 47 for half a century. I sat in on as many briefings as they'd allow, listening to theories and speculation, serial killer dumping ground, human trafficking route, accident-prone area with bad infrastructure. None of the theories quite fit because there was no evidence of foul play in most cases. People and vehicles simply disappeared from that spot with no signs of violence or struggle. "What about the payphone?" I asked during one meeting. "The one that called me. Has anyone looked at its history?" They had. The phone company had records, going back to its installation in 1968. It had been disconnected for non-payment in 1995, should have been removed, but never was, forgotten by the phone company in the chaos of deregulation and corporate transitions. According to all technical specifications, it couldn't make calls. It had no power source, no connection to active lines. It was as dead as the van buried in the woods, but I'd received a call from it. The phone records proved that. "How is that possible?" I asked. No one had an answer that made sense. The paranormal researchers arrived next, convinced this was evidence of something supernatural. They set up equipment, recorded electromagnetic fields, took thermal images, did all the things people do when they're trying to find scientific evidence of the impossible. I let them work, watched from a distance because at this point I was willing to consider anything. One of them, a woman in her 30s, named Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had a PhD in folklore and worked with a team investigating unexplained phenomena, approached me one evening as I sat in my car near the site. "Mrs. Chambers, may I talk to you about your daughter?" "What about her?" Dr. Vasquez settled into the passenger seat uninvited but not unwelcome. "I've been studying locations like this for 15 years, Places where disappearances cluster, where reality seems thinner somehow. There's usually a precipitating event, something traumatic that creates a kind of scar in the fabric of a place. "You think this place is cursed?" I said flatly. "I think this place is wounded," she corrected. "And I think sometimes, very rarely, people who disappear in these wounded places leave echoes behind, traces of themselves that persist. Your daughter called you after 20 years. That's not impossible. It's just extremely unlikely and poorly understood." "So, what are you saying? That Emily's dead, but her ghost called me?" "I'm saying that maybe she's caught between states. Maybe she's trying to find her way home and can't quite make it. The phone call might have been the closest she could get." I wanted to dismiss this as nonsense, but I'd heard Emily's voice. I couldn't unhear it. And sitting there, looking at the spot where so many people had vanished, I couldn't deny that something strange was happening in this place. "If she's caught," I asked carefully, "is there a way to help her? To bring her home or at least give her peace?" Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. "In the cases I've studied, sometimes acknowledgement helps. Sometimes just bearing witness, confirming that the person existed and was loved and is remembered. Sometimes that's enough to let them rest." "That's what I've been doing for 20 years, I said. "Remembering her, waiting for her." "Then maybe," Dr. Vasquez said gently, "it's time to let her know she can stop trying to come home, that it's okay to rest." Quiet counter move, plan, 13%. I went back to the payphone the next day, alone this time. I'd thought about what Dr. Vasquez had said, about acknowledgement and witness, about the possibility that Emily was somehow stuck trying to return to a home she couldn't reach. It sounded like fantasy, like the desperate invention of a mother who couldn't accept the probable truth that her daughter had been murdered and buried somewhere in these woods 20 years ago. But I'd heard her voice. I'd felt her presence in that phone call, as real as any conversation we'd ever had. And if there was even the smallest chance that some part of Emily still existed, still needed something from me, then I owed it to her to try. I stood at the payphone as afternoon faded into evening, as the light through the trees turned gold and then amber, and then that deep blue that comes just before darkness. I picked up the receiver, held it to my ear, and I spoke. "Emily, if you can hear me, I want you to know something. I've been waiting for you for 20 years. I've kept the light on. I've kept your room ready. I've never stopped believing you'd find your way home." The line was silent, dead as it should be. "But baby, if you can't make it home, if something's keeping you from getting here, then I need you to know it's okay to stop trying. It's okay to rest. You don't have to keep struggling to get back to me." The words hurt to say, felt like betrayal, like giving up, but I continued. "I love you. I'll always love you, and I'll carry you with me wherever I go. You don't have to keep trying to reach a place you can't get to. You can let go. I give you permission to let go." Still silence, just wind in the trees and distant traffic on the interstate. "If you're still here, still trying, I want to say thank you. Thank you for calling me. Thank you for letting me hear your voice one more time. I will treasure that gift for the rest of my life. But Em, you can rest now. You don't owe me anything. You don't have to keep fighting to come home. You're already home in my heart. You always have been." I hung up the phone and walked back to my car. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the payphone standing in the gathering darkness. And I swear, just for a moment, I saw someone standing beside it. A young woman with long brown hair and my late husband's green eyes, wearing jeans and a pale blue sweater. She raised her hand in a wave and then she was gone, and I was looking at just an empty booth and darkening woods. I pulled over, started to turn around to go back and check if someone was really there. But something stopped me. Some instinct that said if I went back, I wouldn't find anything. That moment had been for me, a final goodbye, and if I tried to hold on to it, it would slip away like morning mist. So I drove home instead to my house with the blue shutters and the porch light that had burned for 20 years. The investigation continued for another month. They identified most of the remains they'd found, matched them to missing persons cases from across 5 decades. None of them were Emily. They searched every inch of the area and found no trace of my daughter, no evidence of what had happened to her. But they did find something else. Buried deep in the files of disappearances connected to Highway 47, Detective Morrison discovered a pattern. The disappearances only happened on that specific stretch of road, and they only happened to young people driving alone between 10 and midnight. Emily fit the pattern perfectly. But more than that, the disappearances stopped in 2003. Emily was the last one. What does that mean? I asked when Detective Morrison shared this information. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe the person responsible died or moved away. Maybe Emily fought back somehow and that changed things. Or maybe, she stopped. Maybe what? Maybe whatever was happening at that location just stopped. Some cases are like that. A pattern emerges, persists for years, then ends for no clear reason. We may never know why. But I thought I knew. I thought about Emily's voice on the phone, apologizing, saying she'd tried to come home but couldn't get past something. I thought about how the disappearances had stopped after hers. I thought about the buried van and the scattered graves and the cluster of mysteries that suggested something had been terribly wrong with that place for half a century. And I thought about how sometimes, very rarely, a person might become a guardian of the very place that trapped them. How Emily might have stopped trying to escape and started trying to prevent others from sharing her fate. How maybe she'd been protecting people for 20 years instead of trying to come home. It was a fantasy, probably. The invention of a grieving mother's mind looking for meaning in randomness. But it gave me comfort when comfort was hard to find. A month after the investigation concluded without finding Emily, I received a package in the mail. No return address, postmarked from 3 towns away. Inside was a small jewelry box, and inside that was Emily's bracelet, the one I'd given her for her 16th birthday, the one she'd been wearing when she disappeared. Nothing else. No note. No explanation. I called Detective Morrison immediately. She came to my house, examined the package, sent it to the lab for analysis. No fingerprints except mine. The bracelet had been cleaned recently, no soil or biological material that might indicate where it had been. The postmark gave them nothing useful. Someone has had this for 20 years, Detective Morrison said. Someone who knew Emily. Someone who wanted you to have it back. Why now? I asked. I don't know, maybe because we stirred everything up with the investigation, maybe because whoever took it felt guilty, or maybe... She didn't finish, but I understood. Maybe Emily had found a way to send it home since she couldn't come home herself. I wore that bracelet every day after that, feeling the weight of it on my wrist, the solid reality of it proving that Emily had existed, had lived, had been real and loved, and here. It was the only part of her that had come home, and I treasured it in a way I couldn't quite explain. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, I was sitting in my chair by the window when the hallway phone rang again. This time I wasn't surprised. This time I walked calmly to the phone and picked it up, already knowing what I'd hear. "Mom?" Emily's voice, but different this time. Not scared or crying, peaceful. "Hi, baby," I said, tears streaming down my face, but my voice steady. "Thank you for letting me go," she said, and she sounded like herself, like the Emily I remembered from her best days, happy and whole. "Thank you for the light. I found my way because of the light." "Where are you?" I asked, though I knew there wouldn't be an answer that made physical sense. "I'm home, Mom. I'm finally home. Not your home, but somewhere safe. Somewhere I can rest. I just wanted to call one more time to tell you I love you." "I love you too, Emily. So much. Always." I know. I always knew. That's what kept me strong enough to help the others find their way past the dark place, knowing you were waiting, knowing you never stopped loving me. Others? The ones who got stuck like I did. I showed them how to get past it, how to move on. That's why I couldn't come home. I had to stay and help them. But now the path is clear, and I can rest too. I understood then, or thought I did. Emily had sacrificed her own escape to become something greater, a light for others who had been lost on that same stretch of road. My daughter, who'd always cared for others more than herself, had found a way to turn even her disappearance into an act of grace. Her voice, calm and full of peace, carried through the static like a lullaby. "It's all over now, Mom," she said softly. "The road's quiet. No one else will get lost there again. You can rest, too." The words broke something inside me, not in pain this time, but in release. 20 years of tension and unanswered prayers, of waiting and watching that dark street, all dissolved in that moment. "I'll try," I whispered. "I'll try to live again." "That's all I ever wanted," she said. "You gave me everything I needed. Keep the light on, Mom, but this time, keep it for yourself." The line grew faint, her voice thinning like mist at sunrise. "I love you," I said, clutching the receiver like I could hold her there a little longer. "I know," she whispered. "Goodbye, Mom." The connection ended with a soft click. I stood there for a long time holding the silent phone. Then I slowly returned it to its cradle. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of memory, full of love, full of something peaceful that I hadn't felt in 2 decades. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night sky was clear, stars sharp against the dark. I stepped onto the porch, wrapped in my shawl, and for the first time in 20 years, I turned off the porch light. The world didn't end. The darkness didn't feel lonely. It felt complete. The next morning, I woke with sunlight spilling through the curtains. I brewed coffee, made breakfast, opened windows. I even turned on the radio, something I hadn't done since Emily disappeared. The world felt alive again. A week later, construction crews began dismantling the payphone booth by Highway 47. The county was repaving that section of road and finally clearing the old infrastructure. I drove out there one last time, parked at mile marker 23, and watched as they removed the rusted relic that had somehow connected 2 worlds. When the workers left, I walked to the empty spot where the booth had stood. The air was still, heavy with the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. I knelt and placed a single white lily on the ground. "For everyone who was lost," I whispered, "and for the one who found the way." As I stood to leave, a gentle breeze brushed past me, carrying the faintest sound, a girl's laughter, light and distant, fading into the trees. I smiled through tears. When I got home, I placed the bracelet, Emily's bracelet, on the mantel above the fireplace, beside her photograph. I no longer kept her room as a shrine. I opened the windows, donated some of her things, and filled the space with books, light, and fresh flowers. Life slowly began to fill the house again. Neighbors stopped avoiding eye contact. Friends invited me to dinners, and I started saying yes. I still kept the rotary phone, though. I couldn't bring myself to remove it. It sat quietly in the hallway beneath Emily's photo, a symbol of something that once bridged time and loss. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the world feels especially still, I sit in my chair by the window, watching the street where headlights come and go. The phone never rings anymore, but if it ever does, I'll be ready. Not to wait, but to listen. Because love, once spoken across 20 years of silence, never truly stops echoing. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Tell me in the comments what you think happened that night, and subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the last line fades.